Good evening, everyone. I'm Andrew Dean. As Lakehead University's Vice President of Research and Innovation, it is my privilege to welcome you all to the official launch of Lakehead University's Year of Climate Action. Please note that we are recording this session to make it available on our website. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge the original custodians of this land and to pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture, and the hope of Indigenous peoples. I'd also like to recognize that our Thunder Bay and Orillia campuses are on the traditional lands of some of this country's Indigenous peoples. In Thunder Bay, we are on the traditional lands of the Fort William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850. In Orillia, Lakehead University resides on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe people and of the Ramba First Nation. I also acknowledge the history that many nations hold in these areas and look forward to respectful relations with the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in the spirit of reconciliation. Climate change continues to disproportionately affect Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Indigenous communities, in particular, have been climate leaders for decades and decades and continue to put in hard work to seek climate justice, despite also disproportionately dealing with its impacts. Indigenous ways of knowing across Turtle Island and the world have demonstrated climate-forward thinking for millennia. As a university, we have much to gain from listening to and learning from and with Indigenous communities. I'd also like to add that an important part of climate action for all of us is recognizing the causes and consequences of climate change. This also includes taking steps to restore our relationship with the land and with each other. We hope that YOCA, and you'll hear that word a lot, is a platform that will bring together our faculty, students, staff, and community members to listen, learn, share, and act on climate change. I'd now like to welcome cultural helper Marcel Bananish to lead us in an opening prayer.
Bonjour. Wapshka tegene bjasaka smoko indo tem. Chimi gwech, aki chimi gwech. Ninga biwanung. Chimi gwech, mino monkey Jesus. I just want to say thank you all for what you all stand and for what you all believe. You all have the strength to change the things that we are all facing today, which is climate change. Let us all be the hands, the eyes, the mouth, the feet for those things that cannot, like the birds, the bears, the wild rice, the fish, the trees. Let us be the oxygen that the poplar provides. Let us all combine our strength so we can all work together as a family, as a unit, so we can bring forth the truth of what climate change is about. Normally, I do not sing on Zoom. And I am a drum keeper. I've been a drum keeper for 30 years. I carry the drum from Black Cloud Singers. My friend Kenny Scabrio had passed the drum to me so many years ago. And it's been the teachings of the elders from Lac La Croix and the community members from Lac La Croix and the members of Treaty 3 that helped me to regain what knowledge I know now. And it's the wisdom from all of you that actually helped me to find what I need to help be that voice for those things that don't have one. So I'm going to sing a song from Lac La Croix. And like I said, I normally don't do this. I do this normally on my own, or when I open up other engagements. But today, when we were with the students at Whitefish Lake, We were trying to harvest wild rice, and it broke everybody's heart because they were so excited. The enthusiasm these children had to paddle on this beautiful lake, and to be disappointed because there's nothing in that shell. So I'm hoping as a unit, as a family, we can refill those pods so we can once dance on the rice, so we can once again become that sustenance in life as a family. Yeah, Oge cheta bene se ni nagamore yai ay 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 Oge cheta bene se ni nagamone yai ay 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 Oge cheta bene se ni nagamone yai ay 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 Oge cheta bene se ni nagamone yai ay ay Ogecheta bene se ninagamone ahai. Yai ay 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 ay. Yai ay 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 ay. We sing 4 push-ups to honor ourselves for the 4 seasons. Wabinong, Shawanong, Ninga Biwanong, Kiwitanong. When we honor ourselves, these drums were given as part of treaties. Hand drums are treaties for ourselves. So we sing 4 push-ups to honor these treaties every season. It's not like it's just one-time thing. This is for the whole year. The song I sang is, we sing this song for you, the great bird, our spirit. So we can honor ourselves, so we can clear our minds and become those people that we are meant to be. And it's so weird, as I sing, I have a friend that came by. It's so weird to see a fox coming to my step as I sing, which is pretty neat, you know. But that's the thing, like, big drums are a community based on peace, based on treaties. So this is the treaty we make for ourselves to honor the place we call Aki. Jaganashi Aki is what we call Canada. So I just want to say thank you so much for Brazil Namang. Gagachimigwich, Kinuya, for Kinmago, for helping each other to reach vision. And bless you all, bless your hearts. Chimigwich.
Miigwech, Marcel. And thank you, Mr. Fox. And thank you all for joining us virtually to mark the kickoff of the Year of Climate Action. I'm very excited to introduce this initiative. We know we have a critical window of opportunity to act on climate change. The Year of Climate Action is our next step in taking that action. The Year of Climate Action is about rising up, regenerating, transitioning, and sustaining. The Year of Climate Action is about creating the possibility for change that is amplified when we work together. While we have declared that the Year of Climate Action, we know this year is a starting place. Now I'd like to welcome Dr. David Barnett, Lakehead University's Provost and Vice President Academic, to say a few words.
Great, thank you, Andy, and thank you, Marcel, for starting us off in a good way with your words and song. I'm very excited to be here today for the launch of our Year of Climate Action. When we consider the grand challenges of our time, it's certainly clear that climate change is something that impacts every person across the world. As we strive to be leaders in this arena, and as Andy noted earlier, it's important to realize that climate change will have a disproportionate effect on populations across the globe that are already struggling with a multitude of issues, including poverty, access to resources, and food security. Here at Lakehead, we are committed to social responsibility and sustainability as noted in our strategic, academic, research, and sustainability plans. We believe as a university, we have a responsibility to become a leader in climate action by educating future leaders, contributing to climate research, and by taking meaningful and bold climate actions ourselves. To that end, on November 26, 2020, Lakehead University confirmed its leadership on climate change by announcing it is divesting its endowment of fossil fuel stocks, the 6th Canadian university to make this commitment. While this was an important step, today I'm happy to gather with you as Lakehead University is declaring the 2021-22 academic year to be the Year of Climate Action and to build on this divestment leadership and recognize the need for more bold initiatives to tackle climate change. We know that we have more work to do, and the Year of Climate Action is our next step. It's a platform to have difficult conversations and a time to consider how we transform words into action. Even if this is a difficult journey, is one worth every effort as we seek to make real and substantive change. We're very proud of our students, faculty, and staff who are dedicated to sustainability and climate action and who bring forth innovative ideas and solutions each day. We invite all of you to get involved in Yoka in whatever way is meaningful to you. And we're all very excited and look forward to what this year will bring. So thank you, Miigwech. Back to you, Andy.
Thanks, David. The Year of Climate Action is passionately being coordinated by a team of faculty, staff, students, and alumni. In addition to coordinating the year, it's Yoka's coordinating committee. The Yoka Coordinating Committee is committed to working towards 4 concrete climate actions that were identified by the Lakehead University Sustainability Stewardship Council. These include 1, installing electric vehicle charging stations on both campuses. 2, providing faculty training on climate change. 3, increasing the visibility of the Thunder Bay campus solar panels. And 4, creating internal research awards for research on climate change, the Yoka Research Awards. Through the Office of Research and Innovation, a special call for projects aimed at research connected to climate action will be launched. Up to 6 awards of $5,000 each will be given through a competitive process. These awards will be available to faculty and students. Many departments, organizations, and individuals are organizing events and initiatives for the Yoka. Here's a taste of what you can expect in the coming months. An event to commemorate the 1-year anniversary of Lakehead's commitment to divest from fossil fuels, hosted by Fossil Fuel Lakehead. An online gathering to discuss radical Indigenous responses to the Green New Deal and climate activism, hosted by the Reimagining Value Action Lab. A sustainable city workshop on incorporating climate mitigation and adaptation into citywide infrastructure and operations led by EarthCare Thunder Bay. A climate action art exhibit in collaboration with the Lakehead Education Research Galleries. Special initiatives during this year's Research and Innovation Week, which this year will have the theme of planetary stewardship. And more will emerge as the year unfolds. As you can see, we welcome a diverse array of contributions. We hope you will join us for these initiatives and events, and you can find out more at lakehead.ca/yoka. Now I'd like to welcome Lita McKellar, Lakehead University Sustainable Coordinator, to say a few words.
Thank you, Andy. I'm so pleased to be here today participating in the launch of the Year of Climate Action. We know the climate crisis that we find ourselves in can at times be confusing and overwhelming and frankly frustrating. When we think about the problems we face as a collective, it can be challenging for us to know what to do. Millennials and younger generations, I think, have often been told the future's on us. Our generation's unsolicited job is to solve this problem, and it can be a heavy burden. Although in a different light, as author and environmentalist Paul Hawken has said, you couldn't ask for a better boss than the planet. Climate change is no longer just about numbers and percentages. We are all witnessing the impacts of extreme and increased weather events such as forest fires, droughts. We don't just read about this in the media anymore. All of us now experience it firsthand in some way. Although, as Dr. Dean noted, there are major discrepancies in how the impacts are experienced. And I believe we can't have climate action without climate justice. And we're so excited to hear Indigenous rights and climate justice activist Clayton Thomas Mueller speak tonight. I think the climate crisis connects many movements for well-being, education, Indigenous rights, and movement for water, soil, and biodiversity. So the challenges are many. I work for the Office of Sustainability at Lakehead University, and I see climate action as inseparable from sustainability. Our office in the past couple of years worked with our community to create Lakehead's inaugural sustainability plan, which outlines how the university is approaching climate action. And I'll put it into the chat after this. There are many ways that the sustainability plan addresses climate action and sustainability, but ultimately I think both are about life and the gift and responsibility of life for all living beings. Despite the heaviness with which we find ourselves in this situation and the critical window of opportunity that we are presented with, I am inspired by our community and the many leaders who envision a just transition away from human-caused climate change. There are many people on the ground in Thunder Bay and Aurelia and across the world, really, who are working passionately to act on climate change. So I'm very excited about the Year of Climate Action in particular, because it's a platform to build relationships and, like Dr. Barnett said, to have difficult but honest conversations, which is really so important to this work. While we may all approach climate action from a different place, I think we can all agree that respect for planet Earth is required. I want to acknowledge that we know we have more work to do than can be accomplished in 1 year. Our Year of Climate Action Coordinating Committee, which is composed of quite a dedicated team, envisions the Year of Climate Action as a starting place. So let this be a place for us to mobilize collectively and continue to envision a way forward. We don't really always know what the way forward is, but we can figure that out together. I'm very grateful to the faculty, the staff, the students, the senior administration, and the community members who are creating the Year of Climate Action to be something special. Because as I said, we really are figuring this out together. Lastly, I want to remind all of us to take care of ourselves and each other. We're in this for the long haul, and we'll continue to face ups and downs. Let's allow this year to be a way to create the community of support that we need. Paul Hawken has said, the most complex, radical climate technologies on Earth are the human heart, head, and mind, not a solar panel. I see the Year of Climate Action as an invitation to join hearts, heads, and minds in facing this challenge. When we work together, we really can amplify change. So I hope you will find a way that's meaningful for you to join in on the Year of Climate Action. And this is our invitation to you to get involved. Thank you.
Thanks, Lita. Now I'd like to welcome a staff member, faculty member, and student from Lakehead to inspire us by sharing how they are getting involved in the YOCA. First, I invite Hugh Briggs, Lakehead University's Director of Physical Plant and member of the Lakehead University Sustainability Stewardship Council, to say a few words.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to participate in the Year of Climate Action. I'd like to just mention a few of Lakehead's achievements that we have done here at Lakehead. Lakehead is one of the top 3 university campuses in Ontario for having one of the lowest energy intensities as published by the Ministry of Energy since 2011, when provincial reporting began. I think that's quite a good achievement for Lakehead. We can still do better, but it's a good achievement. We recently completed 2 major projects. We did some high efficiency renovations at the Bor-Alaskan, which resulted in a reduction of CO2 by 203 tons in that building alone. We recently also completed a renovation in our kitchen, which resulted in a reduction of approximately 881 tons of CO2 per year. So those are two projects that we recently completed. Andy mentioned the solar array on the roof of the cafeteria. I'd like to give you some stats on that 20 kilowatt solar array. 2020, our production was 31.7 megawatt hours. 2021 to date, it's 25.3 megawatt hours. Our highest months of production are May, June, July, and August, averaging about 3.8 megawatt hours per month. And the lowest months are October, November, December, and January, averaging about 1.2 megawatt hours per month. Snow removal is always a challenge in the winter when you have a PV array. And finally, I'd like to highlight that Lakehead University completed a facility renewal project that started in 2004 and has continued to result in energy savings for the university. Over the past 15 years, we've averaged a reduction of CO2 of approximately 9,580 tons per year. So I'd like to say that Lakehead is doing our part. There are still more things to do, but we definitely are on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. I now invite Dr. Ellen Field, faculty member in education and member of the YOCA Coordinating Committee, to say a few words.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks to everyone who's here. I wanted to first highlight that today a large global survey came out, and this survey really resonates with young people's hearts and well-being. And it indicated that nearly 6 in 10 young people between the ages of 16 to 25 are very to extremely worried about climate change. The stat that really got me is that 4 in 10 fear having children due to climate impacts. As faculty and educators, we need to ensure that we're not only including climate change content into our teaching, but actively working to ensure that young people have livable futures. As a faculty member, I've decided to participate in YOCA in a couple of ways. As an adult ally to the climate justice movement, organizing a Fridays for Future global climate strike on September 24th. If you're going to be in Orillia, please come out between 12 and 1 p.m. We'll be marching for climate action. In my environmental education classes, students can turn one of their assignments into putting on a YOCA event for the Lakehead community, or they can turn this assignment into learning about and modifying habits and reducing their greenhouse gases, such as active transportation, tracking their food waste, adoption of plant-based diets, or conducting energy consumption audits. Students can also complete an assignment in conjunction with their Aboriginal education course where they can research a person, group, or event of Indigenous climate leadership in Canada. And lastly, coming up in May, Linda Rodenberg from Community Engagement and Lifelong Learning and myself are working in collaboration with the Sustainable Orillia Youth Council to host a Simcoe County-wide Climate Change Education and Action Summit for high school students and teachers in the region. Thanks.
Thanks, Ellen. I now invite LUSU President, student, and member of the YOCA Coordinating Committee at Lakehead University, Lahama Naeem, to say a few words.
Thank you, Andy, and good evening, everyone. I'm very excited to have the opportunities to speak on behalf of the students of what the Year of Climate Action means to us and the Lakehead University Student Union's plans to get involved this year. At LUSU, we know better than anyone that students are the heart of this school. We also know how important climate change is to them, and as such are very excited to do our part in the Year of Climate Action. Though our journey is just starting, our Sustainability Initiative Center is already working on multiple initiatives to engage, educate, and support students throughout the year. We hope to do this through events that represent and support students from a diverse set of backgrounds and perspectives. Though tentative, LUSU is planning on revamping its own spaces and events to make them as sustainable as possible. We plan on collaborating with community partners to support their efforts and creating climate-inspired art projects that will even reach beyond the Year of Climate Action. While the future remains very, very uncertain, the students of Lakehead are optimistic and will step up to the challenge, not just this year, but going forward. We at LUSU are looking forward to doing everything we can to support our students and to a bright year full of climate action. For any students wanting to get involved, I encourage you to connect with our Sustainability Initiative Coordinator or myself. We're planning to hold events throughout the year in collaboration with YOCA and would love to have you involved in the process. Thank you for your time this evening. The Lakehead University Student Union looks forward to a great year of continued collaboration with YOCA. Thank you, Miigwech.
Thank you, Lahama. So we're now ready for the final part of our event tonight, the keynote presentation. I invite Dr. Lindsay Galway, Canada Research Chair in Socio-Ecological Health and faculty member in Health Sciences, to introduce our keynote speaker and to moderate the Q&A following. Dr. Galway is also a member of the YOCA Coordinating Committee and originally proposed the idea for the YOCA to the Sustainability Stewardship Council.
Thank you, Dr. Dean, and fellow climate action allies. This is exciting. This is really wonderful to see emerging. And again, it is really just the beginning. So I am truly honored. I am humbled truly to introduce our keynote speaker, Clayton Thomas Mueller. Clayton is a member of Treaty Number 6 Base Mathias Kalom Cree Nation, which is also known as Putakawagan, which is located in northern Manitoba. So currently Clayton is based in Winnipeg, and he's also a senior specialist, campaign specialist with 350.org. So Clayton is involved in many initiatives, and he's working to support the building and the amplification of an inclusive and meaningful global movement for energy and climate justice. He has been recognized by Yes Magazine as a climate hero. And Clayton, you're one of my climate heroes, and I learned today in discussions with my mom that you're also one of her climate heroes, which was wonderful to hear from me today. So Clayton is also featured as one of the 10 international human rights defenders in the National Canadian Museum for Human Rights. He has campaigned across Canada, across Turtle Island, Alaska, the lower 48 states, organizing in hundreds of First Nations, Alaska Native and Native American communities to support Indigenous peoples to defend their territories against the fossil fuel industry, with special focus on stopping the expansion of the Canadian tar sands and, of course, associated pipelines. So Clayton is a campaigner. He is an award-winning film director, media producer, organizer, facilitator, public speaker, and author on Indigenous rights and justice. And for any of you who are Lakehead folks, I just wanted to flag that you can get a copy of Clayton's new book, which is titled Life in the City of Dirty Water. I can't wait to read it. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my list and it's available at our university bookstore. So I suspect we're all now feeling honored and humbled. And as you will hear shortly, Clayton is a force. He's an inspiration and he is a humble leader. So before I pass on to Clayton to invite him to share his words and wisdom with us this evening, I did want to remind folks that we will have a Q&A session, a moderated Q&A session after we hear from Clayton. So please feel free as you listen, as you're hearing the words and the wisdom from Clayton, to add your thoughts in the Q&A, and we will move to the Q&A session later this evening. So thank you, Clayton. I'll pass on to you.
Gosh, thank you so much, Dr. Galloway, and for all of the administration and organizers, especially Lita, involved in bringing us all together tonight. Bashu, Tanse, Zongabini, Sianene, Tishnakas, Kinutotem. I'm really happy to be here tonight. You know, gosh, 2 years into this COVID stuff, it sure gets lonely sometimes. So when I get a chance to hang out with people on Zoom, I actually really appreciate it. So yeah, I just want to thank everybody, for all the participants, for signing up tonight and coming to spend some time with all these incredible speakers that presented before me. So yeah, climate change, climate justice. You know, I talked with one of the coordinators, and they said they wanted me to come on tonight and talk a little bit about the intersectionality between, you know, the global triple threat that we're currently facing right now collectively, although some of us disproportionately being burdened, you know, by the global triple threat. I think more so than others, a little bit more insulated, a little bit more privileged. So the goal of my presentation tonight is to just kind of like shine a light on some of the circumstances, especially juxtaposed against the snap election that we're currently going through, and the lack of action, unfortunately, by decision makers, political parties, all stripes, who continue to, you know, either delay or deny what the majority of the world's leading scientists have been telling us, that we got 10 years. Actually, you know, we've got 7 years now because of the continuing delay by the current government. And, you know, my team at 350.org, Canada, you know, we've been working diligently with our base, working to expand the base, to provide tools, organizing tools, mobilizing tools to our base across these lands they call Canada. You might have been a part of one of our recent actions on September 8th between the national French and English debates. You know, Canada is still on fire. We had, I think, 62 actions across the country, mass actions where people, you know, were calling on political leaders of all stripes to take meaningful action on the you know, not just the climate emergency, you know, the existential threat of climate change, but also, you know, all the things that it's connected to, you know, this global recession, unprecedented recession that we're experiencing right now collectively as human beings, as well as the, you know, global pandemic, the COVID pandemic. You know, these are truly unprecedented times, you know, and in Canada, being a circumpolar country, settler colonial state, is experiencing climate change in a different way than other places in the planet are. In our Arctic regions, climate change is accelerating at a rate 5 times, compared to, other places that are closer to the equator. We're seeing an unprecedented wildfire season that most likely will continue until the snow falls, at least in the western provinces. There have been floods, there have been drought here in Manitoba. So many of our rivers and streams have completely dried up and have impacted drastically, wild rice harvests, fishing, and a number of food security issues, not just for, indigenous or rural communities that, subsist heavily, off of country foods. They subsidize the cash food diet that most of us are accustomed to in urban centers, with being able to go out on the land and hunt, to fish, to pick berries, to harvest other wild foods. And there's this whole cascading impact that coupled with just unprecedented inflation, especially when it comes to home energy, home heating and cooling, home food security and water security. The scale is quite dramatic in terms of the disproportionate impacts that I mentioned earlier, as far as Indigenous communities across Canada, these lands that they call Canada, and rural communities as well. And so, it's pretty bleak, eh? Like I think Lita or somebody mentioned how intense it is and how immobilizing and freezing it can be to be dealing with this circumstance. I talk to a lot of young people in my work. I've been campaigning, against big oil, big fossil fuel for my entire adult life, and the incredible impacts that climate change has already had in the places where these multinational corporations operate in collusion with the governments they're manipulating with their bottomless pockets of resources, of finance. The powerful banks that they collaborate with as well. It's been a real big David and Goliath kind of battle for a number of years. And, one of the things I wanted to bring up just right at the beginning of my talk here was this groundbreaking report that was put out by Oil Change International and the Indigenous Environmental Network. And I encourage all of you to read this report, to reference it in your studies on climate justice, and to share it on your social media platforms, because what this report looks into is the last 20 years of the fossil fuel fight, the fight for climate justice. And what this report shows is that Indigenous leadership, Indigenous resistance, globally has resulted in 25% of emissions, being kept in the ground exclusively by Indigenous peoples, which is a very significant statistic when we look at the number of Indigenous peoples that live on Mother Earth. We're talking about a population of 300 to 450,000 human beings out of 7 or 8 billion human beings on the planet at this point. And so that's a very, very powerful show of social movement strength and moral authority and spiritual power that the world's stewards of the sacred places where you can still drink the water, where you can still harvest medicine, where you can still hunt and fish without getting sick. These are very, very special places. And the reason I bring up this report and this staggering statistic of what Indigenous peoples have accomplished, not just on their own, but with the support of other social movements and funders and rich white folks or whatever, this just hammers home the understanding that governments and corporations have had for quite some time now, but that they have been trying to, as they have with climate science, trying to delay or dupe. You know, indigenous traditional knowledge is right there in the Paris Climate Accord. You know, the biggest diplomatic gathering of world leaders ever in the history of human beings happened in Paris recently. You know, Canada is a signatory to the Paris Agreement. It's the only economy that has continuing rising emissions, and no answer to the tar sands or other, you know, heavy carbon polluting sectors of our economy. You know, they just continue to say, yep, climate change is real, but, you know, we're going to take our time. The report is actually, sorry, I didn't post it to everybody. Sorry. There it is. But you know, the reality of it is that this country continues to, you know, still be heavily influenced by the oil sector, by tar sands, you know, and by other heavy carbon polluting industries. You know, in a recent report that the federal government put out, you know, on the methane, you know, emissions work that they were trying to do in partnership with the U.S. administration. You know, it says right there on page 98 of that report, right in the last page, that Canada's biggest methane emitting sector, you know, is hydroelectric dams. You know, so one of the big areas that Canada is trying to sell as a green technology, as a transition technology off of the fossil fuel economy, is actually one of the biggest emitters of a fossil fuel or a carbon or a gas that's 26 more times potent as a greenhouse gas than CO2. And so we've got a lot of work to do in this country. You know, it's a pretty wild circumstance that we're in. And all the while, you know, there are other issues that are continuing to happen. You know, we're in a snap election, and you know, how many of you have heard, you know, any of the candidates, except for I think Jagmeet Singh, mention, you know, the thousands and thousands of children that are finally being returned home from, you know, the hundreds of residential schools across this country. You know, there should never be graveyards at children's schools, but there are, you know, at the hundreds of Canada's residential schools. And these schools didn't close down like 100 years ago or 120 years ago. You know, they closed down in the 90s. That's when the last residential school closed, I believe in 96 or 98. You know, I'm 44 years old. I was the first one in my family not to attend residential school. I attended public school, which wasn't, you know, wasn't like it was in the US. There was no armed guards from the National Guard escorting us little Native kids into the school when segregation ended here in Canada. No, they just sent us to these schools. And gosh, it was a really difficult, it was tough. You know, I lasted till grade 8, and then I dropped out in grade 8 because I just couldn't deal with the racism in Canada's schools. I think I might have went to about 30 or 40 public schools in my time before grade 8. But that's a similar experience to many Indigenous peoples who grew up in Canada's urban centers, you know, across this country. And that's actually one of the things that my book talks about. And I encourage you all to check it out. If you don't read books, there's an audio book that you can order too, and it's cheaper as well. And it's actually read by me. So, you know, check that out, because I think it might help. You know, whether you're native or non-native or an immigrant or whatever, I think that book might help you understand a little bit more deeply. But the reason I bring up the residential school stuff is because, you know, as a son of a mother and a father that both attended residential schools, you know, I can safely say that it had a very dramatic impact on both myself and my younger sisters and brothers. You know, my parents, they did their best. I didn't really get to know my father, but I grew up with my mother, who was educated. You know, she became a psychiatric nurse and works in forensics and in prisons. And you know, she's pretty badass. But what I will say though is that, you know, even with her being so badass and like providing me with, all the things that I needed to be able to, not end up incarcerated or having committed suicide or having, drank myself to death, or all the things that tend to happen to Native people from my generation. There were still a lot of things that went wrong. And, my family, and I think many Native families across this country continue to have questions about, why is it so darn hard in our homelands? Why are we suffering so bad when we come from such abundance, when we come from such riches? And I think, the late Chief Arthur Manuel said it best, the Native people have control over less than 1% of our traditional territories, of which we have title over. And, if you don't have land, then you're going to be poor, and that's just plain and simple. And so, we continue to be in this weird place in Canada, even with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that was headed up by former Senator and former Judge Murray Sinclair from here in Treaty 1 territory where I live, which is home to Anishinaabe, Nakota, Dakota, Ojibwe, Assiniboine, I believe, and of course Cree, which I am, and of course the Métis Nation. But this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it was a very difficult process for residential school survivors to go through. They traveled the country, from coast to coast to coast, and they interviewed, countless survivors from residential school to share what they had gone through. And it was a very painful thing because people had to relive their trauma. And, they made 94 recommendations, that report continues to be referenced. But, as I mentioned, I'm 44, and before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there was the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, which was a 7-volume document that laid out in the most articulate and concise way how Canada could finally get things right with Indigenous peoples. And before that, there was a report called the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry, which came out over the killing of J.J. Harper by the police state, in this country. And was it J.J. Harper, or what was the guy at Anishinaabe Park again? Oh gosh. Anyway, but another huge report about the police violence towards Native people and the overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples in Canada's prison system. Today, I think Native people represent 5% of our population in Canada, but we still represent, I think it's like in excess of 23% of Canada's Indigenous prison population. And Native women, as a matter of fact, are no, dude, no. Okay, yeah, I'm on a webinar. Sorry, it's my, love you. It's my son. And he knows I'm on a webinar, but anyway. But yeah, Native women right now are 600 times more likely to go to prison for a jailable offense than a non-Native woman in this country, the fastest rising prison demographic. But if we flip that whole thing around, and the reason I bring this up is because, Indigenous peoples are always being told to get over it, to get over the past, to just get over it, and it's a really insensitive and cold, and that's some cold-blooded shit that people say to us sometimes, because would you ever say that to somebody from Rwanda, or to somebody whose ancestors went to Auschwitz during World War II, or any other major genocide event on the planet? And I think once it was presented in the media that these children were being unearthed and finally being able to come home, just over the summer. We don't see it in the news anymore. the former head of the TRC came out himself and he put out a video statement, Murray Sinclair, and he listed all of the restrictions that they had. They were not allowed to investigate certain elements that would have proven unequivocally that this country was guilty of genocide, not the specific designation of cultural genocide, but specifically genocide. And so there's this constant denial and delay of justice for Indigenous peoples. And, and this is like horrific, what people have gone through. I've sat many nights with my mother and my grandmother, who are both my roommates, who both went to residential school. And they told me about the horrors, about the way that the places where the children slept reeked of urine and fear, because of all of the abuse and the things that were happening, and I dreamt about these things, even though I didn't go to residential school, and as a matter of fact, where my sons live with their mother, they just live, a few blocks from where I'm at. But we found out this summer that this big building that we go sled by, there's a sled hill where we go snow sledding in the wintertime. There's a building across the field there. And we found out it's a residential school. And this summer, my son Jackson, he's 12 years old, he texted me this picture of his little shoes hanging off the train bridge by that building. And he said, it's pretty funny, that my playground is a mass graveyard. Hey, Dad. And I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't know how to respond to my 12-year-old texting me a picture of this big field that we've gone sledding at, since he was just a baby. And he's 12 years old and he's there by himself, and he texts me, he's like, yeah, Dad, it's pretty funny that I grew up on a sledding on a mass grave, and this is the conversation that Native parents have had to have with the children here over the last many, many months, and that, my parents and people from my generation had to have, through the 80s and the 90s. This is difficult conversation. And I think that, one of the challenges, with the TRC and like the 94 recommendations, and, one of the things that I guess I get concerned about is that I see the same tactics being deployed by the current government as I see being deployed on the climate emergency. Okay. And, the Trudeau government and the Conservatives, they want Canada to believe that we're stuck in this either one or the other kind of scenario, when that's just not the case. Science has told the planet that we have 7 years to act on the global climate emergency. Okay, we burned through 3 years of that. This election represents, in the next 4 years, represents one of two final administrations of the Canadian settler colonial state government to enact at the scale of the climate emergency solutions to turn the tide on this issue. But what a lot of people don't think about, and maybe it doesn't land home a lot of the time, is that colonization caused climate change. Okay, the first climate justice activists were the first Native people resisting westward expansion of industrialization. The first climate activists were the ones trying to stop settlers from killing all the buffalo to use their hides, and all those coal burning steam machines to do farming and other industrialization things that came with that kind of technology. And that has continued to this very day. And I think that what we have to understand is that we are living in an unprecedented time, a social movement time that, quite frankly, is very exciting. Fridays for Future, the global climate strikes were mentioned, by one of the former speakers here. And I'll tell you, a little over, I guess, almost a year ago, September 27th, You know, when Greta Thunberg came here to Canada and, you know, traveled across the country and then, you know, on September 27th hit MTL, Montreal, you know, 500,000 children marched on the streets in Montreal that day. 20,000 right here in my home city of Winnipeg, 1 million across Canada. You know, and that shit was unprecedented, you know, and at that moment too, the Wet'suwet'en Nation put out a call to action to shut Canada down because of the unprecedented violence of the police state, the police apparatus of Canada. You know, they sent in RCMP tactical units. They dropped down from military helicopters into the forest there in northern BC, north of the town of Smithers. And they pointed semi-automatic machine guns at women and children, unarmed women and children who were not protesting, who were not illegally anywhere. These are Indigenous peoples who have never ceded their territory. They have no written agreements with the Crown of Canada, and were acting completely legally within their title to be camping out on their traditional lands to stop a proposed fracked gas pipeline called the Coastal GasLink pipeline to be built through their sacred estuary, you know, where you know, they've got rivers there that are salmon producing rivers, and they live on the salmon like so many Indigenous peoples in so-called British Columbia. And, you know, when they put the call to action out to shut Canada down in response to the violence that their women and children had experienced at the hands of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and Justin Trudeau and his administration and the Horgan administration in British Columbia, you know who responded? It was the children that are participating in Fridays for Future, in climate strikes. You know, it's young people who have been participating in election campaigning, you know, to get climate champions elected into the Canadian Parliament and into their provincial legislatures. You know, and it was these young people that shut down every single sector of the Trans-Canada Highway, the Yellowhead 16, you know, US border crossings, and just about every train in the country for a week and a half. And it was only because of the COVID pandemic shutdown that you know, escalation concluded. But I guarantee you that we will see much, much more come because of the fact that, you know, again, I go back to this fact that, you know, we're not hearing anything about the climate emergency during this election at the level that we need to be. We're certainly not hearing anything about murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, which is another intersectional issue that is fundamentally and inextricably linked to Canada's extractive economy model. You know, when economies are disrupted across so-called Canada and the North, and people lose their ability to live off the land, and they end up urbanized, you know, in one of Canada's inner cities, whether it's the downtown East Side or Edmonton or, you know, Regina, or here in Winnipeg on Main and Higgins, or you name it, you know, MTL, Toronto, Halifax. You know, this is where bad things happen, where people disappear, or they experience violence, or they fall through the cracks of Canada's social safety net that wasn't built to protect them. You know, and there's a big historical context of this story of dispossession that's tied to Canada's extractive industries economic model. You know, and our economy in this country is fundamentally based on the practice of dispossessing Indigenous peoples from their lands through whatever means necessary, you know, putting them in ghettos and urban centers, you know, and you know, all with and disenfranchising them of their collective rights, you know, the right to not pay taxes, the right to, you know, whatever, and then providing backdoor open access to, you know, extractive industries, not just from our country, but from across the planet. You know, just about every oil company from across Mother Earth is operating in the Alberta tar sands. You know, and this has been the story for 200 years of industrialization in the history of this very young settler colonial state. And, you know, and so all of these issues are inextricably linked. And, you know, one of the things that just makes me so freaking excited is the fact that young people today, they have a completely different mindset. You know, there's this huge like expression and resistance and, you know, just disgust with the toxic patriarchy, the toxic white supremacy, you know, white patriarchy, you know, and toxic masculinity that has been so pervasive and created such an imbalance in these lands that we share. And young people today was the you know, biggest high school in the United States, UC Berkeley. I think it got like 10,000 students there, and like 86% of them identify as non-binary, which I just thought was like the most amazing thing on earth, you know. And I just think that there is a massive shift that we're seeing now, especially amongst young people, and certainly amongst women, whether they're grandmothers or daughters or, you know, cousins or sisters or aunties. You know, women have been leading, you know, the global justice movements that we're seeing explode across Mother Earth, especially climate justice, you know, especially in Indigenous communities. It has been Indigenous women that have been the ones that have been building the social movement, organizing infrastructure so that communities have the tools that they need to take action, to resist. You know, it has been women leading the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls movement across these lands that they call Canada. It has been women that have been leading this movement to bring the children home from the closed Indian residential schools. And, you know, and it's women that are calling out the BS coming, you know, just the lip service coming from the federal government of Canada on all of these issues when we look at them intertwined and intersectionally. You know, Trudeau made a lot of promises 6 years ago when he first got in. You know, he said he was going to fix the boil water advisory crisis in First Nations, said he was going to do something about murder, missing Indigenous women and girls, said he was going to get reconciliation right. You know, other famous people said he was the one that was going to make all the change. But, you know, as we see, you know, birds of this feather, you know, whether it's conservatives, NDP in the middle, or liberals or whatever, you know, there is a block with the decision makers. And that's why, you know, the work that I'm involved in with 350 Canada and all the other hats that I wear are very much about building the largest social movement in the history of humankind. And I'm not talking about just here in Canada, but across Mother Earth, because, you know, a lot of the different political decision makers, they'll point fingers at Native people, they'll point fingers at idealistic youth, they'll point fingers at institutions like Lakehead that have taken very dramatic steps and, you know, divested their portfolios or in the process of divesting their portfolios from the fossil fuel sector. But this movement is growing, you know, and I congratulate the administration at Lakehead for being so brave and joining, you know, what was it, the sixth institution, academic institution in Canada to divest. I mean, the global divestment movement has moved, what, $20 trillion out of the fossil fuel economy? I mean, ExxonMobil used to be the Amazon of the stock market back in the day, right? Now they're a junk bond. So there's change that is happening, and it's happening very quickly. And, you know, I encourage you all to take a look at social movement history. You know, everything that's happening right now has happened in the past. You know, if you look at the history of the US civil rights movement, you look at Dr. Martin Luther King, when he's walking over that bridge in Selma, Alabama, with all those religious leaders and community leaders, and they all got their heads bashed in by the police apparatus of the United States of America just for asking to end racial segregation. You know, and it wasn't until the children came to the front line, and this has been the case in a lot of social movement uprisings across Mother Earth, it wasn't until the children came to the front line that things changed dramatically, and the Overton window of what was possible, showed itself. And at least on paper, racial segregation came to an end in the United States. I mean, obviously, economically, it hasn't, and the whole Jim Crow, prison thing and all that, continues to persist. And there's a lot of work to do on that issue. But that's where we're at on climate change, and that's, I believe, where we're at on reconciliation. The thing that the Canadians and immigrants and migrants need to understand and need to be allies to Indigenous peoples with on this topic is that until this becomes a non-native issue, there will continue to be reports, multi-million, tens of millions of dollars reports just shelved and collecting dust. And I don't want my sons my son Felix is 15, my son Jackson's 12. I don't want them to be, my age, 40, and have 3 or 4 other commissions that they're referencing in his story. And for things to still be the same, in Canada when it comes to the diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the justice piece, I think, is the most important. When you put all that together, what does it say? Jedi, right? So I need all the viewers on this webinar to be Jedis, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and to think about that concept as you educate yourselves, as you go through your academic career and do your student activism, to be intersectional in your thinking. And if you don't know, ask for permission, ask for an explanation on how to deal with things, and you might get a rough answer, especially if you ask in a native, but don't give up. Keep trying. There's such a polarity, I think, that exists right now within these lands that they call Canada, especially between Indigenous peoples and everybody else. And and we need to close that distance. And it's only through making mistakes and trial and error and trying to organize safe space for us all to come together to figure out how we're actually going to tackle the real enemy, which is private sector corporations, operating completely unregulated, and actually controlling our governments instead of the other way. And we need to create a movement like the one that we're building at 350.org, but it's many movements, though. It's not just us. It's like a shit ton of movements. But I want you all to check out Climate Alliance. This is it's our campaign that we're rocking right now. But basically, we're going to see what happens on September 20th, in a week from now. Everybody's going to go to the polls. I encourage you all to vote. You got to vote. But I encourage you all to go and vote. We've got a whole slate of climate leaders that we've endorsed from multiple parties. But coming out of this election, one of the big things that we're going to be pushing for is the Just Transition Act, which is supposed to create millions of jobs, for Canadians and Indigenous peoples alike. These jobs are meant to leave no worker behind, and to basically retrain and retool, trades workers into the renewable energy economy, or the Green New Deal, as some people have been referring to it. But it's also, meant to be rooted and completely in partnership with Canada's Indigenous peoples, and to be rooted in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is the bare minimum standard for where countries should be working in partnership with Indigenous peoples that, whose lands that they're occupying, like Canada. But that JTA, that Just Transition Act, is part of a multi-suite of legislative pieces that we need to hammer. Whatever government comes out on September 21st, we got to hammer this government, because we got, 7 years. according to science, to stave off the most, vile impacts of climate change, violent, unpredicted, wild ass climate weather-related catastrophes that are only going to increase and compound, as these years go by. I mean, what are we in 12 years now where it's continually the hottest year on record? Is the same thing this year again, and probably again next year and the next and the next for the foreseeable future. So I'm going to leave it on that and just say that, I'm very inspired by what I'm seeing happening across campuses across Canada. I'm so excited and congratulate the Lakehead administration for your move on divestment. I think it's like incredible, and I can't wait to see other universities feel the heat, pun intended. And yeah, let's open it up to some questions and stuff.
Wow, merci, Miigwech. Thank you, Clayton. Thank you for inviting us to recognize colonization as the first cause of the climate emergency, for shining light on that darkness and the other dark forces that are inextricably linked to colonization and continue to fuel the climate emergency. Thank you for asking us to look back while we look forward to a brighter future. Thank you for also shining light on the possibility of climate action if we choose to act together now, this year, and the next 7 years, as you said several times, right? It's now, so that we can protect Mother Earth for your Felix, for my children, my Madeline, Owen, and Finn. And thank you for inspiring us to be part and calling on us to be part of the biggest ocean movement of all time. And a final thank you before I take questions from our audience. Thank you for helping us begin the Lakehead Year of Climate Action in a good way. Miigwech. And thank you for dancing. So please, folks, audience members, I encourage you to add your questions for Clayton in the Q&A box, and I will pass them along to you verbally, Clayton. So what has called to you as you listen to Clayton? What do you want to probe or hear more about? What stories do you want to hear from Clayton? And I know Clayton truly enjoys taking and answering questions. So we'll start. We do have a question here from Robin Fay, and she is asking a very practical, very timely question. She's asking, how can we best support the opposition to Line 3?
Yeah, I mean, GNEW Collective, GINEW Collective, I think is probably the tip of the spear. Tara Huska, if you can find her on Twitter. I'll try and find her Twitter account here. But yeah, GNEW Collective is the most important crew to be supporting. They've been the ones, that have, I think there's been 900 people arrested at their encampments. Biden recently, approved Line 3. But they're continuing the fight, and they need all the support that they can. Unfortunately, on this side of the Medicine Line, the U.S.-Canadian border, construction is complete. I think, except for a pump house right there at the U.S.-Canada border. But yeah, the work in Minnesota, Wisconsin by Tara Huska and the GNEW Collective is really important to support. The other crew to support, it's a little bit more institutional, is Winona LaDuke and Honor the Earth Foundation. But they all work closely together. Indigenous Environmental Network as well, I believe, based out of Bemidji, Minnesota, has been working on that collectively as well. So yeah, GNEW Collective is #1. Honor the Earth and Indigenous Environmental Network. If you can send donations, like cash donations, if you can go and volunteer, they're really, really important to support.
Wonderful, thank you. That's so many great different ways that we can engage in that and support for different capabilities and places of privilege, right? So I have a question from Ellen. So she's thinking about Lakehead students, who we know we have many joining us here this evening, who are listening to the lessons and the wisdom that you shared. So what learning or action would you suggest are top priorities for university students, for our Lakehead students?
Oh man, well, I mean, obviously I want to really encourage everybody to check out climatealliance.ca, our website, find ways to, to volunteer. I mean, we've got a week out to the federal election, but, we've got all kinds of volunteers that have been doing text banking and, calling folks, we've got all kinds of different tools to support the slate of climate action champions that we're trying to get elected into the parliament, you know, and yeah, there's lots of really great resources on the climatealliance.ca website for you to plug in. And we've got a sick team that can definitely support you and your crew on, you know, how to be the most impactful in terms of making this a climate election and getting climate champions, you know, into this next parliament.
Thank you. We have a question from Tundi. I hope I'm saying that right, Tundi. So she's asking, or he's asking, I'm not sure, or they, is Canada the worst offender, Clayton? Can you give us a sense of where Canada stands, specifically relative to other developed nations in the action required globally to fix climate change?
Oh yeah, they're total. Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, you got to look at it at scale, right? If we're talking about if we're talking about like consumption, you know, a Canadian family of, I think, 3 consumes more than an African family. No, an individual Canadian consumes more than an African family of 10 annually. Now, granted, it's, you know, it gets cold ass here in the wintertime, but it's, you know, we're literally like per capita, like one of the worst like violators of climate change on the planet. And, you know, and it's really unfortunate because we're also a very wealthy country, which also makes it like just like that much more like maddening that Native people don't have clean drinking water in this country or housing, you know, but we've got $1 million, you know, shacks on the Ottawa Canal where people can change their skates and have a hot chocolate, but they can't, you know, build some houses on a reserve. You know, it's you know, I don't think that Canada is the worst offender when it comes to, you know, militarization to the scale that I think other economies, Indigenous peoples and poor peoples experience at the hands of the police apparatus. But Canada is definitely, you know, a dirty player. And Canadian imperialism is exported through mining practices. 86% of the mining companies on the planet are publicly traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange. They're Canadian based. So Canada actually exports a lot of its own Canadian style of imperialism and colonialism, like neo-colonialism across the planet. And Canadian mining companies are responsible, and oil companies are responsible for, you know, all kinds of human rights violations and straight up murder across the planet. So, you know, yeah, Canada's pretty raunchy.
I really appreciate your honesty and your ability to really convey these complexities so clearly for us, Clayton. So we have a question here from Lita. So she's wondering, can you tell us about a point in your career when you had an epiphany or a turning point that inspired you to keep going? Or were there any specific moments along the way that really, you know, drove you to become committed to this work, the work that you do?
Well, I mean, it sounds cheesy, but, you know, when my little boys were born, you know, my little boys have they just like inspire me, you know, and you know, that's been one of the silver linings to this COVID pandemic is you know, I haven't traveled in 20 months, you know, but I'm usually on the road 4 weeks a month. And so, you know, it was pretty like brutal at one point. You know, my oldest son, he's like, yeah, Dad, you know, this has been great. You've been home for 20 months and we're spending so much time together. And he's like, yeah, growing up, you know, you just be there all of a sudden, have a bunch of toys and candy and cool activist t-shirts, and then you'd just be gone, you know. And so, you know, in the last 20 months, I spent more time with my sons than I have in like their entire lives. And it's been a blessing, you know, like a real blessing. And so, yeah, no, my boys, they're a real driving force. They inspire me. And they call me out on BS too. Like if they think I could do better, they tell me. They're very, they're my sons. They're very direct. So.
They sound like a force just like you, the next generation climate champions in the making, I imagine.
Well, I'm careful to impose my political or spiritual, like they can do whatever they want, but so far they've been, yeah, they seem like they're going to be little badasses.
So we have a question from Shadia, who herself is an organizer here and played a key role in the fossil-free, divestment from fossil-free movement here at Lakehead. So thank you, Shadia, for all your work on that front. So Shadia wants to know, how do you suggest we engage Indigenous people and communities in climate-related projects, recognizing the importance of Indigenous sovereignty and leadership without overburdening them with doing all the work? How do we ensure that climate organizing doesn't perpetuate colonialism and make it unsafe to participate in that movement? And she says, miigwech for your keynote, with a big smiley face.
Well, that's a difficult question, but it's something that I've been working on and my crew's been working on for a lot of years. We give a lot of shit to NGOs, like environmental non-governmental organizations, and a lot of them have really responded and are doing way better. When we bring frontline community leaders, from places like the tar sands, like Fort Chipewyan or Fort McMurray, and, bring them to Europe to speak at a bank that's financing, destruction of their homelands or whatever, that shit's stressful. It's just like the TRC, them asking all these survivors to talk about what they went through in residential school. And then when they're applying for their residential school settlement, they got to write all that shit out again, and then they got to recount what they wrote out on the residential school settlement, to a whatever, an officer, to get their money on their settlement. It's re-traumatizing, and it's really insensitive. And it's the same thing with a lot of these, survivors of extractive industries in Canada's economic, exploitive model. It's predatory economics and how they apply to frontline community people. Because if you lay a map out of every First Nation, Inuit hamlet, Métis settlement, and all of Canada's most toxic industries, you'll see that they're all adjacent to Indigenous communities, and that environmental racism in this country is, by and large, very much a red and white issues. That's not to say that there's not poor, communities of color, poor white communities even, that are experiencing, environmental impacts, because of their economic status or their racial and economic status. But for the most part, it is disproportionately on the shoulders of Canada's Indigenous peoples. And so, so the important thing, if you're asking an Indigenous leader to come and speak at your university or at your press conference or at your, the protest you've organized, pay them. And if you can't pay them, be super honest about that, but be like, you know what though, we're gonna go eat some serious burgers and fries afterwards. We're gonna totally get you home super comfortable. Just be real. And sometimes Native folks might tell you to F off, and you know what, that's perfectly within their right. But don't give up, because that's usually the tester, eh? Because you know how many white folks come up on Native people all the time and they're like, I want to change the world, but they're just talking out of their ass and they don't do anything. It's very rare that an actual non-Native person will come in a Native community and be like, I want to do this and I want to do it right. And then they actually follow through and do it right. Usually what ends up happening is it's just some half-assed shit that ends up re-traumatizing people who have already been traumatized way too much, And so, if you're going to do a thing, you want to invite a Native speaker, set aside some money for an honorarium, especially if they're an elder. If they're living on a pension or some shit, you make sure you get them a dope ass, a taxi. Better yet, go pick them up and drop them off. Feed them really well, put them in a nice hotel, and offer them tobacco. Make sure you know what the protocols are of their society, their nation, and honor that. Do your research, because there's so many people that have good intentions, but I mean the nuns and the priests for the most part in residential schools had good intentions, but we all see where that went. So it's not about your intentions, it's about the way your intentions are perceived. And so, approach it from that perspective. How am I being perceived? And, and govern yourself according to that.
Well, we have just probably time for one last question. So this is always the hardest part, picking the final word.
I got this like 3-minute video too that I wanted to show if I can.
Okay, yeah, we'll do that. So why don't we ask one quick question, and then we'll allow you to, and Caitlin, maybe just make sure that Clayton has the ability to share his video in that way while we're answering this last question. That would be great. So a final question, and you spoke about this in a few different ways, but I think it's a great question to end on, given, you know, where we're looking forward to as a community, as a Lakehead community in the Year of Climate Action. What advice do you have? What's the most important, you know, nugget of advice for those folks, those people who are thinking of engaging in climate activism and climate justice work, or the Jedi fight? I love that. So what is the, you know, the really important advice that you would share?
I think the main thing is like, you know, be really proactive, you know, and like, well, you like, especially the students that are watching right now, like, this is the time for you to like go through trial and error to learn as much as you can in your student activism career. Like, if you're getting involved in student politics and like all that stuff, like this is the proving ground. This is good training ground where you can make mistakes. You can learn how to balance like your activism and your work, like your like, this is where you're going to learn how to like not have career burnouts consistently. Is like, while you're in college or university, you know, so you can like dedicate the time that you need, you know, like to support a good cause, while at the same time, you know, like you know, focusing on your career path, your studies you want to do. I think that you know, this is really good time for you to do that. And then the other thing is just be proactive, you know, and realize that we're not living in a world anymore where things are siloed. I think there's this intersectional, like, incredible awakening that is happening right now, where people are more open to things. You know, whether it's conversations about, you know, sexuality and you know, all of that kind of thing, or whether it's conversations about toxic masculinity and how to like deconstruct white supremacy and white patriarchy, whether it's conversations about white supremacy and like how to undo white supremacy and lift up, you know, step up, step back, you know, kind of things. And especially, I think this is a really cool time to really like, you know, to take your time in building initiatives and to bring in young people, like, I mean, like young people, like, you know, elementary and junior high, and like elders, you know, from your community, to really do things in an intergenerational and a community set way. Because at the end of the day, whether it's, you know, us collectively turning the cart around again, the cart before the horse, you know, on reconciliation, truth and reconciliation, you know, that's what we got to do. You know, these empty promises don't mean shit to Native people anymore. And we've got to like, we gotta like have an open conversation about reparations in this country, for Indigenous peoples, you know, and let's start there and then go back again to that apology thing. And then I think things will kind of even out. And it's the same thing with climate change. You know, it's not Native people or students or hippies or environmentalists that are impacting Canada's economy. It's these politicians who are not taking action. You know, to the word of 98% global consensus of the world's leading scientists on the International Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. It's put off 6 reports now, doomsday reports, saying the end of the world, for humans anyway, is well on its way if we don't phase out fossil fuels. And so, you know, as you go through what you're going through and you begin to start taking on these issues, it's important to realize that the only solution at the end of the day is localizing power in the interest of globalizing justice. Community self-determination is exactly what it's all about.
Wow, I just wrote that last bit down, Clayton. That's really magical. So I'll let you share your video. You said you had a 3-minute video you wanted to share as your final word before I share some just concluding thoughts and close us off for the evening. So go ahead and share, please, Clayton.
Let me know if you can hear the sound. Can you hear it?
We are one with the earth, with the sky, with the sea, with the sun. We are one. We're Indigenous people. Unuhit, the notion that we are one is a simple truth that has guided our life in ways that has sustained us since the beginning of time. We value the sacred knowledge of the earth that has been passed down to us through the generations, knowledge that can bring us the healing the world so desperately needs in this time. As we face the most critical challenge of our time, climate change, we urge all peoples to shift their relationships with the earth and with each other. As Indigenous youth, we are in the front lines of climate change, and we are also in the front lines of fighting it. Indigenous rights are imperative to climate justice because climate change is the result of colonialism. My ancestors were the original climate activists, beginning at first contact with our resistance to the desecration of our sacred lands and sacred waters. For hundreds of years since colonization, we have been saying that this way, this colonial way of relating to our lands from a point of extraction, from a point of taking without reciprocity, without giving back, is flawed, and it will drive us to destruction. And now we are on the precipice of global collapse. We as Indigenous youth are calling on global leaders to do better. We've sacrificed everything for our lands. We've fought, we have died, we have had our children taken away from our homes because of these lands. And we are calling you to fulfill your responsibilities. Because it's not just about protecting our livelihoods, it's about the livelihoods of your children and your future generations, and our ability to live on this sacred land.
Y actualmente hay 33,000 personas que están en riesgo de perderlo todo por el levantamiento del nivel del mar. Nosotros no consumimos combustibles fósiles y a pesar de ello somos los que más vamos a sufrir. Somos los que más sufrimos por el cambio climático. Estamos a punto de perder nuestra lengua, nuestra tierra, nuestra tradición, por la forma en la que viven en las ciudades. Así que tenemos que dejar estas palabras vacías, estas palabras de los gobernantes que no están haciendo nada, porque necesitamos acción ya. Necesitamos acción ya por las mujeres, por los niños, por la comunidad LGBT, por todo, por los pueblos indígenas.
Cool. That was from the Global March for Climate Justice from Madrid,
I'll
Spain.
start that again. The recording in progress interrupted me. So, Iklanete, everyone. My name is Ariel Tsaekwe Duran.
That's okay. Your next video, the next in line, which also looks amazing. So Clayton, I'm sure I don't speak for just myself. You have moved hearts, minds, and spirits, and I had to just take a breath there to keep, to keep myself contained personally. So this brings us to the end of our Year of Climate Action launch event. And so what now for us, right? So as Lita and Dr. Dean articulated very well for us earlier at the beginning, this is the beginning of our collective journey in support of climate action as a community, as a Lakehead community that is grounded in this place. And also as Knowledge Keeper Marcel asked of us, it is once again time to become the sustenance for life as a family. So thank you all for tuning in wherever you have joined us from, and for the work that you're already doing and will do throughout the year and beyond in support of climate action. And before we sign off today, I encourage everyone to visit our website, thelakeheadu.ca, /yoka for more information about how you can get involved and support the Year of Climate Action. If you are interested in becoming involved, hosting an initiative, an event, or leading an action, we have a toolkit to guide you in your planning and in your efforts. You can learn more at our website, or also connecting with Lita McKellar, Sustainability Coordinator. You can also follow us along throughout the year on social media. Our hashtag is LakeheadYoka. And finally, join us in our social media campaign, which is hashtag 36 Climate Actions, which officially launches Monday, September 20th. And during this campaign, we will challenge our community members to engage in a weekly climate action over 36 weeks. So that brings us to the end of our evening. Merci, Miigwech, thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.